You know, you do see a lot of really strong brands spend 3 or 4% on ads because good news travels. The product, people start talking about it. You can't get it anywhere else. So I really encourage people to put way more time into the R&D of their product, because if you have a really strong product, it's going to be so much easier for you in this e-commerce journey. Welcome back to the E-Hustle. I'm Paul Waddy. As always, if you like the E-Hustle, don't forget to rate it 5 stars. It really helps. And go and follow me on Instagram at Paul Waddy E-Commerce for free e-commerce tips. So today what we're going to talk about is how you create a product from scratch, right? So let's recap the 3 main ways that you can start a product-based business. So we've got buying wholesale. What I mean by that is buying from other brands. So you might be a sports retailer and you might be reselling Nike, Reebok, and so on. Then we've got white labeling, which is sometimes called ODM. And white labeling is just adding your logo to a generic product. So it might be a leather factory out of China, that like I used to do. Here's my logo, put the logo on the shoes and call them my own and import them. And then the third one is OEM, which is original equipment manufacturing. So if you're browsing Alibaba and so on, OEM, that's what it means. Essentially means manufacturing your own design. An example of that would be creating a unique toothbrush from scratch with a manufacturer for OEM. So what we're really talking about today is we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into the OEM side of things. So really the creating your own product from scratch. And there's 2 subcategories when it comes to OEM. One is creating your own version of an existing manufacturer's product. So a manufacturer might have a range of pet toys, and you might want to do a slightly different version of those pet toys and put your own tweak on it. And then there's inventing a brand new indestructible pet toy that has never been done on the market before. So you're going in and you're engineering that product yourself. Now, from my footwear business, again, when I started that a long time ago, I was doing private label. I was white labeling products. So I would go to China, I would look for 3 or 4 really nice men's shoe factories, and I would simply cherry pick the best shoes. So I was essentially a buyer, and I'd put my logo on them, package them in my shoe boxes, put them into my cartons, and I would essentially import them and then sell them at a markup. Now, what you can do on the OEM side of footwear is try and create your own mold. So you think sort of Kanye West and the Yeezys, create a brand new mold. Now, if you do that, you know, let's say you go to China, you see the shoe factory, but it's not quite right. So you want to say, look, I need a wider shoe. It needs to have this on it, all the bells and whistles. So when you're changing the structure of the shoe and not just the upper and the design, but the actual mold or the structure, that's where the money kicks in. The minimum order quantities are much higher. So opening a new mold for new designs would be essentially as close as I tried to get at that point into OEM. But really what we're going to talk about today is when you've got an idea for a new product and it doesn't exist. So who are the key people involved in product creation? So really it comes down to the role of the product designers and engineers, right? And so what do product engineers actually do? They do things like prototyping for you. They do research for you on the product. They create 3D renders. They'll create your design files, all your technical drawings, and often they'll go ahead and make prototypes for you using 3D printers these days, or they might work with a manufacturer to even get your samples made. And eventually product engineers can actually work very, very closely with your manufacturer and sometimes help you find a manufacturer. And so a lot of baby products have been engineered, but I remember one of the brands that I've worked with, Julka, essentially were doing all of their product engineered. They were doing outdoor hot showers, for example. And of course, because they weren't on the market, when they launched them, they absolutely flew because you couldn't buy them anywhere else. So Julka is an Australian brand that really focuses on product engineering. So some considerations before you start creating your own product. So we've got to talk about what is the time commitment. Is this a fast or a slow process? Now, it's pretty slow and it can take rounds of revision depending on what sort of product you're doing, but it's not uncommon for this to take years. Now, you might have a more simple idea that's, you know, not reinventing the wheel, so to speak, that might take, you know, even 3 or 4 months. Now, the cost considerations, it can cost anywhere from 10,000 all the way up into the hundreds of thousands. So it really, again, depends what you want. I don't want to scare you off and say it's going to be hundreds of thousands, but you should at least carve out 10,000. If you're going to try and save money, you can use platforms like Upwork.com to go and find an offshore product engineer who'll do it much cheaper. Just be mindful of the communication barrier, which could make the time really start to drag out a little bit. So you don't really need a brand new idea. You could have a tweak or a better idea. As you know, I always say, you don't need a new idea, you just need a better idea. You can certainly use a product engineer to take an existing idea and make it better. And so I've given you the example of Julka and what made them successful. And they threw themselves into research and development. And what then happens is, because you can't buy the product anywhere else, their sales really started to fly, and they could never keep the stock in. They always had a big backlog of customers because the customer couldn't buy it anywhere else. So they really went on an absolute tear. So let's talk about supply and demand. So demand is when there's demand for a product. So people are queuing up to buy outdoor hot showers because they want a hot shower while they're camping. So the demand is there, and you need supply and demand to have a successful e-commerce business. Now, assuming your product is in demand, so you manufacture this product and you've done the research to make sure that it's not just you that thinks it's a good idea, that there is demand for that product, then it comes down to supply. And if there's an oversupply, so if there was 1,000 Julka type businesses in the world, Julka's traction would have been much, much slower. So if the market is oversaturated with supply, that's what makes it very, very hard for any brand to get cut through. So you want to find that sweet spot where there's strong demand or growing demand, but also not an oversupply. And that's where product engineering can come in, because there might be a very, very big demand for something, but the supply isn't there. So you go ahead and say, well, I'm going to be the key supplier, or maybe even the only supplier. And it's worth pausing here to say that R&D, research and development, matters way more than marketing, particularly in the early stage. Elon Musk famously says, Tesla doesn't spend anything on advertising because I'd rather put it all into R&D. And I get his point. If you put more and more investment into R&D, good news travels. You know, you do see a lot of really strong brands spend 3 or 4% on ads, because good news travels. The product, people start talking about it. You can't get it anywhere else. So I really encourage people to put way more time into the R&D of their product, because if you have a really strong product, it's going to be so much easier for you in this e-commerce journey. So especially for you new guys out there, really stop and think about R&D. And that's why we're talking about today, well, maybe we start to look at creating products. So I want to do a step-by-step recap on creating a product from scratch. The final steps are, from idea to manufacturing, find and validate the idea. So you've got to have an idea, but you've got to validate it. Validating it means using tools like Google Trends to see if people are searching for it, making sure that there is demand. Okay. Secondly, we want to hire a product engineer or a product designer. You could Google one in your local market, or you could go to upwork.com and put an ad out for a product engineer. We want to get into the R&D phase with the designer. So a good product designer or engineer should be doing that research for you. Say, well, look, here's 3 or 4 competitors. Here's what they're doing. Here's how we can make it better. So they're really worth their weight in gold, particularly when they help you with the R&D. Finalize your design files, get them ready for a manufacturer, find an OEM manufacturer. So if you're on Alibaba, for example, you want to search for manufacturers that do OEM. In many instances, the product engineer, because this is what they do on a day-to-day basis, they might have some manufacturers they can introduce you to. And in my experience, I would like the product engineer to help me throughout, even if you have to pay them an hourly rate, help them throughout the whole duration of your business from start to finish. So not just the design process, but actually as they start making the products, and even as you start selling them, keep that product engineer on your books. So the next step is we start prototyping and testing. So it might be initially to save money. You're doing 3D printing. That's a great invention, which stops you having to create molds, which is the expensive part. So it might be some 3D prototyping and testing, again, using your product engineer and probably their connections, or maybe the manufacturer that you found directly on Alibaba. We refine the multiple revisions. It could take 2 or 3 or 4 revisions, and your product engineer will help you with that. So you'll be testing the product, revising it, and so on. When you're happy with the prototyping, you open the final mold. So that's where the money is. That could cost $10,000, $20,000 to open a mold. Could cost $110,000. I have done a product that costs $110,000 to open a mold. But then you start manufacturing, and often when you open a mold, that's the expensive part. And depending what you're doing, once the mold is open, the unit economics can actually be quite good, depending again on what you're making. But opening that mold, you could open a small mold that gets you, 5,000 units or something, and then depending on what product you're doing, you might need to upgrade to a more expensive mold to get you 1,000,000 units. Again, you can worry about those issues later. But I guess thinking about if you were going to China and buying stock, you're going to spend 20, 30, 40, 50 grand buying stock. In this instance, you might spend that same money on a product engineer and opening a mold. And then the unit cost can be quite small moving forward. So I guess the closing thoughts for me is that, is this for everybody? No, it's probably for you if you don't know, if you've got a really good idea and you don't know where to find it on Alibaba. That's not a bad thing at all. So if you've got a really strong idea and you've validated it, that's where I think you need a product engineer. The things that you need to consider before going down the OEM route is that it can be quite slow. But I like that process. And when you take it to market, that's part of the story. This took me 3 years to do. And you've got all the design drawings, you've got the prototypes, you've got the full story that people can buy into. You can document the whole process and take people on the journey. So the main obstacle for many of you will be the upfront cost of a product engineer and opening a mold. But I want you to also think that if you went to China like me and bought a ton of shoes, you're probably going to spend just as much money. That's how you create a product from scratch. You find a product engineer, a product designer. I've done it. It's a fantastic experience. Can be frustrating when the samples come back and they're not quite right. But hey, that's importing as well, guys. So for those thinking about, should I go down this path? The answer comes down to 3 things. 1, have you got a good idea? 2, have you validated it? And 3, can you afford it?